Hello, and welcome to Soul Play, where we explore the art of living with curiosity, connection, and creativity. I'm your host, Sarah Benoit, and I'm so incredibly grateful you're here. Throughout my journey, I've crossed paths with remarkable individuals, guests who join us here to share their wisdom, stories, and practical insights. These inspiring voices are shaping a better world, offering perspectives and tools that my younger self would have loved to discover. Soul Play is more than just a podcast. It's an invitation for all of us to show up authentically, reclaim our power, and reconnect with the essence of who we truly are. Today's guest is Joe Lightfoot. Joe is a writer, podcaster, coach, and community builder based in Chiang Mai, Thailand. What a joy to launch Season 2 with such a meaningful conversation. In this episode, Joe and I explore the deep human craving for connection and belonging. We discuss how the disconnection of modern life has left many yearning for community, and discuss practical ways to create intentional groups that foster trust, growth, and healing. We dive into the role of rituals, play, and shared experiences like music and dance in bringing people together across differences, as well as the importance of healthy boundaries in fostering deeper connections. If you're curious about reimagining community and creating spaces for healing and growth, this episode is a must listen. Without further ado, I welcome Joe Lightfoot. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
So I had the pleasure of meeting you just over a year ago now at a festival in Thailand.
Yes.
Yeah, you were at our home campsite space where it was just filled with beautiful humans, and your energy melded so beautiful in that time. And I knew immediately, like, who is this guy? I want to spend some time with him. Yeah. And since that time, I've had the pleasure of really getting to know you more, and I'm really inspired by you.
Yeah.
And such a gift to have you here on Soul Play. So without further ado, let's get into it. If you don't mind taking a moment to introduce yourself. I am so inspired by how driven you are for building community. And I would love to hear about the fire that lays behind that passion for you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah.
So I am a writer. I wrote a book in 2020 called A Collective Blooming, which spelt out this vision of mutual aid community and how we might rediscover each other and create that. I have been writing articles since then, so I've probably written somewhere between 15 and 20 articles. So I've kind of primarily been in writing mode the last few years. I also did a podcast for a couple of years, which is a little bit in hibernation at the moment, exploring and interviewing different thinkers around community in all different forms. Yeah, and I have created community before. Here in Chiang Mai, we had a community cafe called the Tea Tree, and there was also kind of what I think of as a proto-collective, so like an early stage collective called Dok Rak, which means the flower of love in Thai. And that had a beautiful story for about 5 years of peak connection and then massive dramatic dissolution, which was a few years ago now. So I've kind of learned the highs and the lows and the lessons and the humility of how challenging it can be, but also how magical it is. I'm also part of this broader network called the Liminal Web, which is an international network of different thinkers all focused on systems change. So I kind of plug into that as well. And I think that's probably me in a nutshell, but I can delve into any other parts of it. Well, what are you interested in hearing?
Yeah, I mean, the polarity of like this community, Dok Rak, for example, right? You mentioned it's equally so challenging, yet the most beautiful, blissful thing that you can imagine, right? So what I would love to get into is, how is community formed? I know that it varies amongst places and people. Yeah. And what lessons have you learned to really reduce the risk of it exploding, for example, right? Like 5 years is a long time, but is it actually sustainable to last for longer?
Yeah, it's a good question. And with a lot of the people that I interviewed around the world, there's a similar story of dissolution, often quite dramatically, kind of blowing up at different times. So it seems to be quite common. So I've kind of landed at the idea that I like to think of it as kind of like flowers on a tree or something like that. Like they'll blossom and then they'll die and then they can be recycled to start again. So it can be hard and it can hurt when things break up, like any relationship, but that's creating space for a new thing to come through with deeper lessons. The thing with community, I find, is that in the modern context we're in, my hypothesis and what I've been finding is that we're really all very hungry for connection and belonging. That there's a need that has really been missing, you could potentially say, outside of certain religious contexts for thousands of years, ever since we left the tribal setting and moved into the more civilizational mode. Well, the majority of the Western world, at least, there's lots of people still living in that mode and they never left. And since then, there's kind of like a hollowness and a lack of belonging that my sense is many of us don't even realize is there, that it's so deeply ingrained that we never knew what we were missing. So when we find something beautiful like that, some of us have that in our nuclear families, luckily, but I find that's fairly rare to have this peak level of belonging in that particular context, just because of the way it's set up and all the trauma stories that we're carrying. But some of us do, but a lot of us kind of discover it in these communities for the first time. So we really attach to that and we love it. And it's hard to let it go when it doesn't work. So I'm kind of arrived at the idea of trying to tread lightly with this and be gentle and let things go the direction that they want to and grow and then fall apart. And then I'm in a process now of having been through that with the community, really making sense of that. And really my writing at the moment is delving into what kind of growth or initiations do we need to go through to become what I think of as a community creature, which is someone that is ready to be in a high context communal environment, because it's difficult. Like, we've got a lot of shadows, we've got a lot of unprocessed trauma, we've got a lot of hang-ups, we've just got a lot of growth to do. We've got a lot of relearning to do of how to be in these contexts, because we're not so used to it. We're used to kind of sterile workspaces, or maybe emotionally distant family contexts, or perhaps romantically intense, but, you know, perhaps slightly toxic romantic relationships is a lot of our early experience in the kind of modern Western world. And so to be in a really open, connective space brings up a lot of stuff for us. And it's easy. I watched myself bring in my own shadows and my own projections, and yeah, we've got a lot of learning to do not to tear beautiful things apart, is how I would put it, on the individual, collective, and then societal scale.
Becoming community creatures.
Yeah.
You're preaching to the choir. I hear you so big on this, brother. Like, yeah, I mean, that's a huge motivation for me for starting this collective, Soul Play Collective, right? Really bringing inspiring people around this microphone and discussing where do we go from here. And I think you make an excellent point, which I completely agree with, that to go any further rather than it ending in a cyclical pattern of potentially dissolving, right, is how do we hold and see and meet these parts of ourselves and do the work or do the play, however you want to, really look at that. But meeting what is, And if I can speak to the description that you shared about emotionally distant families, I think this is just the reality of much of our generation. It's just a different time.
Yeah.
And as the pendulum swings, because there was emotional distance in our upbringing, you look at you and I, and we're both like, let's talk about it. Let's sit in it. Let's create something new.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at right now.
Yeah.
Right. And so in your experience, how do we get to becoming community creatures? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. That's a really rich question for me. That it's kind of a living question that I'm unfolding. I think another way I describe myself is like a liminal map maker. I've been making different maps and different schemas and different ways of kind of illustrating these different points. What are the areas of growth that we might need? What are the experiences we might need to go through? But I think the process is we need kind of like communal dojos. We need places to be able to practice relating with each other, making mistakes, owning them, seeing them, having them lovingly reflected to us. And to do that, I think we need to create some form of trust network with a group of people so that you can go through these processes together. Because if we all have our walls up too much, it's hard to grow because you never really take the risk and you never really get the feedback. So I think play is a really important part of it, because that's what pulls us out of our shell, and that's what opens us up and brings us into the context of having experience with other people. So I think music, dance, food, festivities, all of these things are the kind of the way that we begin this process to be able to unite people from many different backgrounds with many different beliefs and open up their hearts, essentially. And then when you get to that level of openness, you can, I think, then start to bring in some elements of like working through material, like psychological material together, and starting to like we created a system of podding, which is getting a group of people who sit together every week for a few hours for a period of months and just kind of seeing what comes up. It's a form of co-therapy, a form of co-mentoring, where you just begin to experience those parts of ourselves that aren't often shared. Because while I think there's a really important place for therapy, and I think most of us really benefit from various types of therapy, whatever stage of development or healing we're at, but a lot of the time what I discovered particularly is that we don't really share all of ourselves in many different contexts. And that makes sense, but that it doesn't give us a feeling of being fully human. And so how do we, and it's tricky, right? Because if you meet up to hang out, you don't necessarily want to delve straight into all the darkness that's going on, because we're all carrying our own burden, we're all having our own challenges. So how do you create the right space that can hold the darkness with a sense of lightness and brevity, that there's enough wisdom in there to be able to, process things that might come up, but at the same time is safe enough that you're not gonna be, people aren't gonna get out of their depths. It's a tricky balance to create in these contexts. So I think of that as podding, and I think that's a really essential part of this process. So rather than starting out with a group of 200 people, which is what happened in the context here, which is wonderful, but it's quite a lot of energy and people to manage, I think starting out in small groups. I wrote an article about this that really goes into like how we can start out with just 2 or 3 people, meeting with them, communing with them, and bringing in different aspects of ourselves, and just kind of training that way, just learning how to be with each other's pain and hurt. And I think one of the things of becoming a community creature is how do you share the depths of your pain and your suffering without necessarily burdening someone else with it. So this is an interesting distinction between like therapy and small group work or community work. Because in therapy, it's like, no, like everything generally is welcome. That's a context, a professional setting for that. But then there's this kind of like middle ground where it's kind of like, all right, I want to talk to the challenges that I'm facing, but I don't necessarily want to bring someone deeply into the depressive or anxiety or whatever that energy is. So there's this whole middle space of group process work that isn't quite psychological, but that is different from just hanging out as a group of traditional friends might, where really nothing challenging is brought up and people surf a bit more on the surface, which to have fun, which is great. There's also a place for that. So this whole interesting middle space of like, what does it mean to connect and be in community? Not quite friends, not quite family. There's like a looseness to it because people will move into different locations, but there needs to be enough of a container, enough of a trust network so that you can start to go on a process journey with other people. And that's where this idea of collectives comes in. And it's tricky, but for the time that I've experienced being in a form of collective it just felt really right, felt really natural. And I think this is what a lot of is happening inside of the churches that exist and are healthy and strong still. That's what they're experiencing. and really outside of a traditional religious context or a traditional tribal context, which is like quite a small percentage of the population now. There's this huge longing for connection. And personally, I think that's at the root of a lot of the mental health issues that we're facing in society. And a lot of it can be ameliorated, or at least held a lot more easily when you're in the context of a loving community container, if not healed completely.
Inspiring. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, I hear you. These are all big questions, right? And the answers are a bridge to where we want to go. It's just like delicately, intentionally meeting these things. And I agree with you. I think pods are a fantastic means of getting there. It's a beautiful practice ground for people to show up authentically, to practice what it means to be honest and share and be seen and heard and held in what's alive in you. That's a big, big deal that, you know, a huge motivation of this podcast and later, you know, a more extensive collective. I hope to bring that into fruition, you know, is really looking at the reality that there is a lack of belonging amongst humans currently in this dysfunctional society. And like, how do we tend to this? And I think pods are an excellent way of beginning that. And I agree with the idea of creative expression, open mics, jams, art, yoga, any kind of like existing that gets us out of perhaps intellect and mind activity, which is often spiraling in these moments of perhaps despair or insecurity or anxiety, bringing people out of that space and knowing that there is another space available that you can coexist with other beings.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
it's so critical. When, as you mentioned that, I mean, one, I feel a sense of excitement for the inevitability of the Soul Plate Collective, and when that finds a particular physical manifestation in your journey, it's gonna hum, it's gonna be a beautiful thing, and I'm excited for that. So I'm feeling that. And then I'm also reminded of this fascinating idea of like membranes. And I think this is something that we're all being forced to deal with in a highly polarized culture and society at the moment, and in our communities as well. Like this balance of, all right, you've got your people that you share your deep ideas with. Wonderful. That's great to nurture that and to have a safe membrane around that. But then how do we create spaces where those membranes can be dropped and we can remember that we're all humans and like we're all, I mean, I'll say it's pretty cliche, but essentially we are one big family if you want to trace it back. And we still have so much that we can connect and share love around that doesn't relate to our particular political beliefs or particular philosophies. So how do we create spaces? And this is where I think spaces like this that we're in, Kindred, Soul Plate Collective, a cafe I used to run, which is welcoming everyone. Welcoming everyone in to participate in connective experiences. I just think that's so important and so healing. But then being wise enough to have pods that don't welcome everyone in, certain discussion groups that are limited to people that share that particular belief system, and really being okay with that and becoming really adept at having spaces that create for all with openness and love, and then more boundaried, membraned, protective spaces where certain values are adhered to or else people aren't welcome there. And getting good at recognizing which space you're in which moment, and oh, okay, I'll transition to maybe a softer or more intense version of myself. And this is all the kind of training and learning that I'm still figuring out how to convey this through this project of becoming community creatures. But that's kind of what I'm pointing towards, because I think that's why we see a lot of the conflict in the world today. Like, people struggle with transitioning to different levels of softness and hardness. And so that rigidity leads to a sense of mistrust. And something that I've learned is like, trust is a feedback cycle. So if you've cultivated and built it, it can continue to grow. But then if it's ruptured or taken away, it becomes a negative feedback loop and keeps going the other way. And it's this really intense truth. And it's, yeah, you've got to kind of like actively, I mean, if it's going the right way, the rupture has to be quite strong to go the other way. And the same for what we're seeing in a lot of the conflict of war and at all the different scales. There needs to be a dramatic injunction of love and compassion at some point to stop that, to see it spiraling the other way. So membranes,
Yes.
boundaries, spiritual bounces for certain spaces and energies. It's fascinating stuff, I think.
Mm-hmm. And this magnetic pull, to me, all I'm hearing is magnetism, right? So it's like when you're vibing so high and everyone is connected, there's trust, there's compassion, there's kindness, there's respect.
Yep.
You know, you're really spiraling in that magnetic pull of growth, development, transformation, belonging. You know, and like you said, if you disconnect from that, the polar opposite can be very dark and isolating and damaging and starts to imprint on people. And it becomes challenging to then get out of that realm, right? And into even the middle way, let alone back in the other direction.
Right. Well, it just brings up the fact that we need to be really cautious and slow and as wise as we can, because this is powerful technology. Community is powerful technology. It opens up really beautiful parts of us, but they're strong, powerful energies. And I mean, the only way we can really learn is to experience. So that's just the beauty and joy of being a human. That's how it goes. But I guess I'm just reminded of like slow and steady and really careful and try and, I mean, cults happen again and again, and they continue to happen because we seem to be wired that way as humans, to connect very quickly and intensely, often having a few charismatic leaders and a few really important truths that we all need to stick to, just to be aware of that and to see that going in quickly, kind of like with love, comes with certain risks of like, oh, did we build a really firm foundation rushing in that quickly? You know, I think that's one of the risks of community. Two of the things that I've noticed is, one, you want to go quickly because it feels like love and you want to just go there, but that doesn't necessarily build the right foundations to go a long way. And then secondly, when we're forming community, a lot of the times, until we get initiated or burned or wizened with it, we tend to be very inclusive. And I think that's the ultimate goal that we're heading towards, but that kind of needs to come in stages. And to be able to come back to that boundaries and membranes idea, there's like a tough love there as well. Of like, if you're cultivating something, you might need it to have a certain flavor for a while before it opens up. And that's a tricky process, but a really important one.
Absolutely. If I can really hone in on this, it's tricky, it's risky, it's where do we go from here, right? Like I understand the idea of pods, I think is magical and valuable and important. But in terms of opening it up with being intentional and having boundaries, what does that look like? How does one gatekeep, creating a community that is more egalitarian in nature? Is that possible in this form of realm? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's such a rich question. I love it. I mean, broadly, there's creating community in the modern world. I think there's lots of different ways to do it. I think one of the most potent ways that I've just seen work is through a space like this that we're in, Kindred. There was one before, Tea Tree, and that it just works really well. It's like anyone can come, a culture builds itself, and then at some point there becomes an opportunity with the people that have gravitated around the event or the space or the festival that they all go to. It can be whatever brings the people together. You then have the option to like, well, do we want to take this into something else? Do we want to form more? I have a model. I think of things as, I think of community as something quite nebulous and open and undefined. It doesn't make it any less magic. It's just like, are you part of the Chiang Mai community? Yeah. Are you part of this Kindred community? People don't really know the answer yes or no to that question. They may be in one moment, they're not sure. That's how I see community. I think a step after that is to form what I think of as a collective, which is when you have the first membrane around it and people know whether they're in it or not. There's like an initiation or there's some sort of commitment to that. And then if you've decided to create that membrane, there's a lot more you can do with it because you adhere to a certain set of values. And then the fascinating question you ask is, can that be wholly egalitarian? Because I think that's what I'm aiming for. And that's what I think the highest version of human organization is an extreme sense of egalitarianism with a respect of natural hierarchies of skill and proficiency. So you have the people that are most experienced at the thing doing the thing, but then you have the power spread as evenly and decentralized as possible. If you look through history, there's this interesting debate going on as to like, Graeber and Wenlow wrote a book called, what is it? Is it The Dawn of History? I forget the name of it. It came out a couple of years ago that really explores how there was a fusion-fission process where a lot of civilizations and tribes would have moments of egalitarian organization. So, for instance, when there was a lot of food in abundance in that season, they were kind of more of a communal socialist collective. But then in the time of the season where things were difficult and maybe there was famine or starvation or just a different cycle of hardship, there would be a more rigid structure emerge. So it's just interesting to think that you might need a combination of both in different moments. And where I've got to is when you're starting out with a collective or an advanced kind of communal structure, I think it's really useful to have a few leaders that set the tone. And I think starting out with a sense of benevolent sort of dictatorship, which is, a loaded word, is actually a good way to begin, because you can then slowly soften that and bring in more of a kind of sociocratic. There's lots of different awesome technologies, like different circles of power and organization. Sociocracy or holocracy are two systems of doing that are really cool. Some companies are running like that in communities. But jumping into that, again, it's this process of becoming community creatures. Most of us aren't used to operating in those contexts, and they can be challenging. So I think a bit of structure and a bit of form and a bit of leadership at the beginning is really good, with the idea that softens slowly over time and includes people as they show up. I think that's a really good way to do it. Who shows up? Who puts the energy in? And over time, those people, I think, have earned the right to have more of a say. It's also context specific on which kind of community you're talking about. But then the last stage in that communal stage model, so you've got a community, then you've got a collective, and then the dream for me is this idea of a neo-tribe, which is sort of a far-flung vision of what would it look like if you were in a collective with people for 60 or 70 years. There'd been a few different generations come through and really discovered each other and raised each other's kids and really woven your lives together in a way that still allows you to operate in modern society. You might still have your own job, your own particular family structure. You might still travel a lot, but you've got a really, really deep kindred connection with a group of people that have been through different cycles of life together and have begun to really connect with the ecosystem again. I think part of what makes something a neo-tribe, and this is a kind of utopian vision that I'm aiming towards, is a reconnection to the ecology around us, a meaningful reconnection to land and the story and the energy of the land. And depending where you are, that might involve some intense healing, because where I've spent a lot of time in Australia, there's still a lot of trauma story that is yet to be faced up with the culture of what was taken from the indigenous people. And so that's, again, not a really easy path, but I think that's where we find, and particularly in this future of AI and hyper technology, I really think we need to rediscover each other and the land. And it's as simple and as complex and as difficult as that. And I think we need to be courageous enough to face up to the difficulties and the hurt that have been there, are there, and will be created in these contexts, and become open and willing and experienced and strong enough to alchemize that conflict into higher expressions of love and acceptance.
And compassion. Yeah, to create conscious change. I like that you bring in artificial intelligence into this, because we are literally at the there's exponential growth when it comes to technology. We can't even conceptualize in what direction we're going. And a concern of mine is the level of deep isolation that humans may experience / already are beginning to experience, and to what end, right? So connecting back and having a felt sense of belonging is so immense. When I hear you speak, when I think about these spaces, which I've had the pleasure of being in also, you know.
You create them.
Yes, right. Yes, intentional creation of these spaces. My whole being has like an exhale, like really just.
I can feel it now.
Right in my body, feeling safe, feeling trust, you know. We need to welcome this more into our existence and create intentional spaces that provide this. To almost counter the revolution, that the technological revolution, which could go in a direction, again, can't even guess, you know, but I think we're seeing people depending a lot on devices and the different media channels, and like comparing themselves to others, increased amounts of like insecurity, anxiety, depression, and without having that held container where people can show up and share these things, then they're more isolated within themselves also. So I am with you, and I want to be at the forefront of a movement for psychological well-being, physical well-being, you know, spiritual well-being, emotional well-being. It's a world that I want to be a part of, and the more I'm here, the more I'm learning that we do in fact have to create it ourselves.
Okay, beautiful. So this ties into the evolution of where my thinking goes and strategizing of how we create that. Because there's quite a, like, for me, this resonant humming vision of a collective blooming is the idea of many different collectives around the world blooming at once in a kind of floral network with a mycelial connection. And that's like a new earth can come out of that, right? And so depending where you're at, that can either be like some sort of hippie fantasy or some sort of grounded reality. I've seen it and lived it, and I know that it's possible, but there is a degree of naivety with that, because then I experienced it with the community here of like, as you spoke, I felt your open heart, and I was nearly moved to tears when I felt that, because that for me is the energy of what is going to bring that healing and that human connection in the face of whatever strange futures we navigate together. And that's such a bold move. And we also, to start with that, to create, but then I was initiated into all the different difficulties, and I didn't realize how much trauma I was carrying. I needed community to show me, and I needed to see other people in community, and I needed to experience a massive communal rift to really understand the depths and really see in myself and others and in the world of ideas that there's a lot going on that needs to be untangled and respected. Like they're valid causes that different people are fighting for. So I feel like now I've been through a period of like world wisdom, mapping it out, understanding, quite sad acceptance of how much suffering and pain has hurt many different people and populations and cultures and individuals. And then come out the other side of that, I think you need to rediscover that soft open-heartedness. You don't have all these walls and armor and you're like, right, now we'll do it again from behind the shields. It's kind of like you need to have a shield in one hand and an open heart in the other, and you need to balance those things. But where I think it starts to get cool is that I think most of us are realizing how much growth and work we have to do on ourselves, let alone how much full-on mental illness or trauma we're living with. So for me, it was discovering quite a lot of anxiety in my system. I'd never seen it that way before. I've had health issues for a while with energy, what I thought of as chronic fatigue, which I've made big strides with. But I never realized that underneath that was this frequency of anxiety. And I'm finding that most people have a depressive or an anxiety type streak in them, or both. It's quite common, but a lot of us don't realize that that's even in there. So now that we're coming to this consciousness of, we're aware that we've got some stuff going on as a society and as individuals, I think there's this beautiful way, rather than just going straight for the full-on collective, which is kind of what I shot for before, which is awesome, really great, we experienced it a bit, but hard to hold together. There's a lot of ways that can unravel. this idea of creating communities of practice around growth, healing, mental health, self-care, upskilling ourselves. So things that really will benefit us as individuals anyway. We kind of need to do that stuff. People are signing up for the workshops, for the therapy, to help themselves get ahead in their own and, thrive in their own way. But actually doing that as a group is much more helpful, much more useful. You can learn from each other a lot. You really need each other to do a lot of that growing. So I like that as a context because it's got a bit more of a boundary. Like community can be a bit like, well, what is it? What does it mean to people? They can be confused. Am I in it or not? What's expected of me? Why are we doing this? And there can be doubt. But this kind of this next iteration that I'm into, this kind of like becoming community creatures context of a collective where it's like, we're here to heal and grow and to help each other do that. So it's got more of like a dojo type experience. There's a set of rules. There's a way that it's done. There's a protocol. There's a bit more structure around it. And there's maybe, you don't need to bring your whole sense of belonging in. Because as wonderful as that is, that's a lot of expectation and a lot of feeling and a lot of risk to put your sense of belonging with a group of people that you're still really forming with. So I like this idea of kind of like practicing together, like learning, teaching each other things, like studying there's so much good material out there. And I get the sense that's really what the Soul Play Collective is going to become. And I'm really excited about that because I'm seeing how important that is. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Music to my ears. Yeah, we are on the same page absolutely with this. And I really want to thank you, Joe, because you've been a mentor for me in this light. You knew about the podcast. You knew that it was out. You knew what kind of guests I was having on, the premise, let's come together. Let's forge a brighter future. Let's create a new earth. And how do we get there? When we sat down in your studio, and it was such a gift for you to ask me intentional questions of what does that actually look like? How do we get there?
Yeah.
And that intentional brainstorming, thought, ideas, okay, well, this could happen. Oh, I didn't really think of that, like things like structure, boundaries, intention, gatekeeping to a certain extent, and really holding your own voice and vision at the forefront. And something too that we identified, which you put so eloquently here, is the critical nature of healing and authenticity. So really meeting ourselves in our shadows.
Yeah.
Both with our own selves and in community. Yeah. So I think what I am envisioning with Soul Play Collective really is, sure, as a podcast, be a form of hopefully psychoeducation, giving people a sense of solidarity in this human experience, really getting to the depths of what it means to be alive. And sure, there's immense variety within that, but we are more alike than we know, and I really want to showcase that. And then Soul Play Collective, as it will come into being, I foresee it being a community space, but really being driven on psychoeducation.
Yeah.
Group therapy, pods, whatever you would want to call it, people coming together, learning from one another, as well as different tools for their toolkit. Yeah. Humans are so varied, nuanced, beautiful individuals, and we can't claim that one thing is going to work for everyone. Right. So to offer a variety of modalities, I think, is really key, whether that's breath work, yoga, art therapy, psychedelic assisted therapy, equine therapy, any form of therapy.
Horseplay. In all of its many forms.
All the play. And I see that, and I see that hopefully being a bridge to getting to this neo-tribe over time.
Right.
Because it's deep development, individual development, collective development, conscious change and evolution.
Yep.
Right. And I think this is perhaps the missing ingredient, really intentional time rather than, we're at an open mic, we're connecting, but then who knows, right? Politics comes in, there's deep polarities in the world currently, and it's how do we navigate that? We weren't taught. And, if we're in a reactionary state where people are, angry, it's just going to create more separation.
Right. And we've talked about how it can be challenging and the difficulties. I think the flip side of that that's really beautiful is the fact that it's kind of how we're wired biologically and psychologically. Like if you look at our history, hundreds of thousands of years in hunter-gatherer tribes, and then it's like 1% of that has been the civilizational mode. So on a really deep level, that's how we operate. So we're like a fish out of water at the moment. So when you give someone some water, they know how to swim straight away. And I mean, a lot of my friends have been having children over the last, 5-10 years. And you start to see how quickly parents get it. Because they're like, we're not supposed to be just doing this, the two of us. Like it just comes home from every angle. We're meant to be part of a bigger community. So any young family is primed for this. And not just from a sense of like, it would make me feel more alive and more connected. It's like, no, I need this. Like we need this for our and our child's psychological health and well-being. So we do have these wonderful natural things pushing us to rediscover each other. And I mean, at the moment, you've got these like, the mental health system in the West, parts of the West anyway, Australia where I'm from, is pretty well developed in terms of like psychological groups where people do group therapy. And you have this model that we're talking about, but it's in a very sterilized, like medical context, which is great and necessary for some people and it's doing a lot of good work. But that's just, all right, well, when people have really found themselves bent out of shape, they end up in this kind of like not so heart-based version of that system. I just think there's such huge scope for the rest of society to experience growing and healing together as a practice outside of being, requiring to be checked into a mental health facility. Mm-hmm. And it just seems to me like inevitable. Like we're realizing that it's slowly happening with the different books and learnings, but we haven't really organized yet that collective communal layer because there's so many little knots to untangle to get that cohesion. But it's just fun and it's just natural, and I get excited because I see there's just so much potential for that.
It's in our fabric. I mean, look at the numbers, right? Like less than, like you said, 1% of our time here on this planet as humans has been spent in this. It's too fast to be kind of stripped from that, like deep, deep knowing. And I think that's what comes with this exhale is a return to that place, a return of knowing and like firing back to our essence, right? Yeah. Yes, I thank you, Joe, for your time. And, it's really such a gift to explore this and not just start the conversation, but keep the conversation going around how do we get there? How do we get there? And so with a collective blooming, for example, your book, what does that look like globally? You spoke about the liminal web. Can you speak to some inspiring stories that you're a part of, that there's some movement for change here? Yeah,
sure. Interviewing the different people that I did on the podcast, this idea, it's not really new. It's a rehash of something that every generation has been grappling with. The whole history of anarchism is examples of like collectives, mutual aid organizations, self-organizing. So it's there in our history, but it's every generation with new technological landscape, it needs to be rediscovered. And there seems to be like a bubbling up. There's Inspiral in New Zealand worth looking at. There may be one of the more robust and longest running collectives that are out there. There's all sorts of wonderful groups that are doing this in very similar and different ways. So it's happening. It's out there. Something that I think is really useful is considering this idea of an integrative worldview. It's something that I wrote about recently and created a model for understanding the different worldviews that are out there. I mapped out 5 of them: the indigenous, the traditional, the cosmopolitan, the holistic, and the integrative. And I think they're all equally worthwhile worldviews. So you can, in this system, divide everyone's perspective into 5 different worldviews. And my suggestion is we have different parts of each of them within us. Some of them are stronger and more developed than others. And really taking the time to understand and appreciate these different worldviews, kind of like you can do with the Enneagram at a personal level. You can start to understand why you might rub up against someone in a certain way. Is because, there's a certain personality typology that you have that kind of gets a bit triggered by that other person, and vice versa. And I think the same is really important at the worldview level, because we're seeing some really stark polarity and divisions between these different worldviews at the moment. And if you can really take the time to become kind of multi-perspectival and really inhabit other people's perspective, like really deeply, you start to see that there's truth in all of these different perspectives. And you start to see that everyone is moving towards their version of what is a good, true, and beautiful world. And if you can see everyone's different version of good, true, and beautiful, then you can start to hold a bit more of this integrative energy, which is where all of that can come together and connect. And at a really simple level, jam nights, open mics, these connective, creative, musical, food-based experiences are a really good place to start, because we all love food and we all love music. And so, yeah, that's a fun way to get going straight away. I think the open mic done right is one of the most powerful connective technologies, because it opens people up to the creativity and the shadow side of themselves. It's a group container, and so that's something I'm passionate about. And something you do so beautifully is invite people in and bring in that creativity. And yeah, I think you're a really wonderful example of how creativity can be such a powerful transformational force, and I want to see more of that out there.
Yeah, thank you. Same here. And I couldn't agree more with you. I think the beauty of open mics also is it provides a platform for people to express themselves. So that's a very intimidating thing, but to create a container where people can show up and be encouraged to get up on that stage and then be held and getting high fives after, motivation, well done, and then they want to create more, they want to get back on that stage. So there's self-development in that process alone. Yeah. I, as a singer-songwriter and musician and host of musical jams or open mics, have felt that development from very intense performance anxiety to the point where physically it was a challenge to be in my own body, right? I was feeling shaky, a bit like sick to my stomach. My heart was racing. And in the event that you run away from that, that will keep emerging, right? Yeah. If we don't meet these difficult, challenging emotions, it might even build, and become more intense. So if in the event that we created an open mic, for example, and people are going through that and are given the space and time to be in that, that level of individual development is absolutely immense, because it programs them to know, them, me, you, all of us, to know that we can get through this scary, almost terrifying, like it's a very empowering setting. I'm a huge improvisational jammer. I am an absolute fan of creating something in the moment. I think it gives access to like a deep, deep flow state where we can consciously escape our minds and this like mental play, which can be quite crippling at times, and really just flow with other people.
You mentioned that that's something really beautiful. I think one of the peak experiences of the community that I experienced here, something that you notice about really beautiful tribal contexts, if you spend some time in those settings, is that people are really comfortable to be silent around each other. And for me, that's a benchmark of when people have reached like some proper depths of communal experience. It's fairly rare. And not like kind of like a Vipassana silence where you're just in silence together and you're kind of forced to be comfortable with it. But there was this one moment where I like the idea of like reintroducing ritual as well, and sort of reintroducing a lot of the technologies like that we've lost. And there was one experience where I was getting people together on the solstices and the equinox to come and share what are the one or two things they've been working towards, how's that going, where were the failures, where were the successes. So a really simple practice, easy, people could come, this is what I'm moving towards, this is what was challenging, cool, moving around. And then having a ritual after that that's, reconnecting again with the planets and the stars, because I feel we've lost that with Gregorian calendar time. And so having a ritual, we did an ice bath and we did a breathing exercise. But in that context of community, on that evening, after having shared the goals, there was a moment after that where people were just quiet together. And it was such a precious and sacred moment. And I think that's a nice benchmark, something to aim towards. Is your group, is your community getting to the point where they're unexpectedly, spontaneously silent? And what is the quality of that silence? And it can be really transformational.
Where the magic happens, absolutely.
Yeah.
And thank you for bringing up the topic of ritual. I think it goes back to when we were talking about religion. There was a base, there was a container there for people to feel held and safe. And sure, it got out of hand, but ultimately the beginning phases and the true depths of what they were aiming for is magic. There was ritual in that. There was community. There's spiritual people coming together in community. Right. And so by creating ritual, especially even the ritual that you just described, there's so much opportunity for reflection there. The importance and value of reflection is immense.
It is.
Yeah.
This ritual piece, this is nice. It's like it brings it back to the simplicity of what I was trying to get through with the message of the book. There are so many things we can only do within a well-developed communal or collective structure. You really can't do ritual the way that I'm envisaging it with a loose group of friends. Friends will have rituals. Definitely. Good friendship groups will be filled with it. But it's usually quite ad hoc, different moments, quite loose. And that's cool. That suits friendships. Friendships is a wonderful thing. But then this more formalized group of people that has this trust network, if you want to bring back initiations, if you want to hold ceremonies for people reaching a certain age, when someone's child is just coming out of childhood, or when someone's really committing to like moving past an addiction and wants to see that publicly. There's so many things that you need a collective for. And you can only do that in the context of organized religion at the moment. And that's not where a lot of people want to go. And interestingly, not a lot of people, but a significant number of people in this broader network that I've been connected to, after years of trying to set up these kind of like somewhat secular, reimagined, sacred community structures, it's so tricky because people are so deeply embedded in their work or their family or whatever trauma story they're carrying. That's it. And they're just reverting to religion. And these people are rejoining Christianity or Judaism or deep Buddhist sanghas. And that's one way. But for me, that feels a little bit like not really meeting the moment fully. I think we need to reinvent and bring the wisdom forward from these lineages and create unitative, multi-belief system structures, kind of like somewhat secular rituals, like I talked about, connecting with fire, connecting with the star. I mean, some of them have a kind of pagan undertone, but you don't need to highlight that. It's more just what's natural, what's something we're all going through. We're moving towards a goal, we're having reflections, we're having difficulties. And so you need a group of people to create that ritual structure. And you just can't get around that. So you're faced with, all right, how do we form that? Who's in, who's not? How do we, these really thorny questions. That's the little bottleneck you've got to get through. But I think it's worth it. And I think we're going to keep moving towards it because there's one thing we're missing. It's ritual structure and
foundation for people to feel firmly rooted in their existence. Because what I'm seeing often is this fragmented or this unwhole parts of ourselves, right? And how do we reconnect to ourselves? I think it is through nature, the environment, with other people. With each other. Yes.
The religion that isn't a religion is another way to think about it. And it's this beautiful, I had this lovely insight around it like 7 or 8 years ago now. That is the antidote to hyper-alienated, intensely technified societal structures, which is what we're in and what we're moving towards more and more. We see it unfolding. Now, there's wonderful opportunities that comes out of all of that. I don't want to vilify technology at all. It's fantastic and transformational, and it will enable greater community cohesion and structure, some of those technologies. But really, I think we need to rediscover each other or we lose our sense of what the human soul is. I think the innate magic and love that is present when you look at someone and you breathe with someone and you create with someone and you watch them go through their challenges and you hold them and they hold you, and that gets exponentially cooler with the more people involved, and there's these many different threads and networks, and it gets to a level, I think of like very high complexity as magic. That's what I call magic, and it is magical. This emergence happens and things happen that defy explanation. And it's so simple. It's such a simple spiritual practice just to be with other people. Other people are nature. So when you're in deep connection with them, you're in deep connection with nature. And we're learning from a million different ways how that seems to be a very healing and beautiful place for the human to be. So yeah, what are we going to do when computers and robots can do everything for us? There's going to be an existential crisis. There already is unfolding. What's my worth? I don't bring any value anymore. Economically, I'm a useless unit. I'm just a burden in this planet. That's one perspective. And I think we're all going to feel that. We don't want to shame that. We've got to hold that. And then realize that the opportunity is to rediscover each other. With that, hopefully that time and energy is spread far and wide so that it's not just pockets of people that have that. Hopefully this is a universal thing.
And a ripple effect.
Right.
Yeah. So the more that we engage in these kind of environments, we model it, we create it, we have that essence about ourselves, the more it will become palpable and tangible for other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think I want to spend our time, my neo-tribal vision is absolutely minimal amount of technology in our life, like highly well-designed and well-developed things that can help us with being comfortable and thriving, but then a really reduced returning to each other and nature type future primitive. That's my vision of what I want to be living in. And it's exciting to get there. We have to practice. We have to practice community. We've got to practice with each other and slowly grow a new sense of connection with each other over time that isn't quite friendship, that isn't quite family, that isn't quite religion. It's this new space to play and operate in.
What a dance. I look forward to it and I welcome it and I feel it. You know, it is already beginning and it's continuing on this path and having intentional conversations and making intentional time. Because you mentioned it yourself and it's very obvious. People are busy.
Yeah. People
are living their lives. Life is unfolding at quite a fast pace.
Yeah.
And how do we introduce it in a way for people that it's available and accessible? Yeah, I think it's a dance that I'm very happy to be a part of. And forging the speed that, you know, at the beginning of the conversation, how cults are formed, there's so much magic, there's so much, we have a vision and there's love and there's passion and there's this and you want it, and then perhaps we miss some steps. So it's rather than going down the same path, you know, and repeating old patterns, how do we pave a new way? Intentionally step back from it and observe what's happening in the moment rather than being so swept in it, then poof, something occurs and you look back like, oh, I could have done that, right? Hindsight is wonderful, but if we can be an active participant through this journey while we are creating these new pathways, new patterns.
One last thing I want to add on that moment where you've formed some community, you've had that experience, I think the wise thing to do is to just open to compassion, because I think our modern world is very well structured to prevent us from being with or seeing a lot of the difficulty, challenges, shadows, mental illnesses that we're carrying. TV, screens, stimulation, substances, outrage, busyness, all these serve to keep us away from connecting with ourselves and from looking at a lot of the darkness that is underneath. I think that's what this wave of social justice has been. It's like one way of like, let's look. And it's being done quite intensely. There's other ways to do it as well. But just be ready for that. Like, I started out as being like, I want to help create a new world. And now I'm kind of like, I want to create a new world, but I want to midwife the pain of the old one first, you know, and to like, you essentially become a healer at that stage, some sort of holder of intensity to be able to transform that. So that's hard, because that's not necessarily a path that anyone would want to choose to walk, but it's the one that's before us. And if we do that together, then it's beautiful. Anything we do together can be beautiful. But if we feel we have to do that alone and transmute the pain of the world and our own journey, it's overwhelming and it crushes us. And that's when you can start to like explore some interesting ideas of maybe the system is set up to some degree to engineer that sense of aloneness and isolation, so that the power structures aren't too deeply challenged, because they're quite happy making a lot of money the way that they do. So there starts to be quite a transformational political story in this as well, of like the collective blooming for me isn't just a self-healing, it's also the start of collective grassroots democratic processes, citizens' assemblies that can start to make decisions at a local scale, political, economic units that reconnect to their biological regions and then connect up. So it's also, I think, slowly how we move to a much more equitable and enjoyable economic and political structure as well. But yeah, I got a little ahead of myself there. Coming back to the just being ready for that humbling, like, there's a lot of shadow. There's a lot of, I call it amnesia, that we don't let ourselves see in ourselves and each other. Just having heaps of compassion for that. Anytime someone's acting intensely or out of hate or violence is, in my experience, directly related to pain that they're not ready to see or that is motivating them. So it's kind of just deeper and deeper levels of compassion and spaciousness. Yeah.
I love you.
I love you too.
Thank you, Joe, for your time. It's been such a gift to explore these topics with you and really get to the depths of where we're at in this current time and where do we go from here. And I think you've provided a lot of really great thoughts. You know, you've been taking notes, you've been exploring, you've been having deep discussions, you've been really devoting your life to exploring this topic of community and the goal of course, Neo Tribe, right? I am with you, and I look forward to being part of this dance and keeping a conscious eye on what it is that we need in the moment, you know, and expect the unexpected and really try to be present and engaged, you know, for what we are seeing and meeting it in that sense.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and so we're coming to a close, but I really offer, you know, if there's anything else that you'd like to share.
Just some appreciation for you. See a powerful, beautiful human that's dancing this dance, and I'm a little bit sheepish with these parts of the vision these days because there's a lot of intensity and charge around. So to have someone be like, yeah, tell me about that, is really like, it's kind of healing in a way, because as I get into it, I'm like, yeah, this is actually the way that I think that we all come together and heal. But it takes that spark, that boldness that you have, that open heart that I feel, then opens mine. And isn't that beautiful that that's a contagion as well? Not just fear, but openness. And it comes down to the like, love is all you need, and we'll conquer all if you can stay with it. But you know, love with boundaries, love with membranes, I think is something a lot of us are learning. And that's good luck to all of us in that journey.
Yes, thank you. And you know, this energy that I felt at Wonderfruit, where we began the conversation, where I met you, there was a sense of open heart there, and I felt very connected. And it's been such a gift to explore this connection further and put fire to this spark. Yeah. But allow it to be dim and be coals and like do the dance of rather than fire, you know. So thank you. Okay. So if you could leave our listeners with a thought, a question, an idea, a wish for the world, anything like that, what would you share?
Just an extra little dose of compassionate embodiment. That's the flavor of what I'm playing with today, and I'd invite anyone who wants to play with that as well, of really slowing down. I'm finding with all this stuff, I mean, you could just see in our conversation the energy rises and the thought and the passion, but really more and more I'm finding it's coming from just being in my own skin quietly. And something actually that's really helped for that, a little tool, is the 5 count breath of 5 in breath, 5 out breath. And when I'm feeling overwhelmed or challenged, it's the first thing I do in the morning when I wake up. My mind is often racing a bit and I'm a bit anxious in the morning. But just doing that breath, and if I stay with it for like 10 or 15 minutes, without doubt, every time it levels out my anxiety. And to have discovered a tool that is there for me, no matter what, no matter how activated or unbalanced I feel, it's like, oh wow, that's so beautiful. I'm really, really glad about that. So yeah, here's
tool.
To the breathing, and Sister Rachel spreading that breath around as well. Another
Seriously,
podcast guest.
Yes. So thank you for that beautiful wisdom there. And I wish it for everyone too, including myself.
Me too.
Much love. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Sarah.
That's it for today. Thank you for listening. I truly hope that today's conversation was valuable to you. To learn more about today's guests, including links and resources related to everything discussed today, visit the episode page at soulplaycollective.com. I'm so grateful you're here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. So don't be shy. Send in your comments and let us know how each episode is resonating with you. If you'd like to support the podcast, the easiest and most impactful thing you can do is to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube, and leave a review and/or comment. Sharing the show or your favorite episodes with friends or on social media is fantastic and super appreciated. And finally, for podcast updates, please follow us on Instagram at soulplay.collective and at Soulplay Collective on Facebook and YouTube. Appreciate the love and support. See you back here soon.